Good morning. I'm impressed you guys found your way home from Orlando or from the Universal Studios. Interesting when everybody sits over there. Either it's because you want to bail out and because I'm boring, or because you can't make your way in all the way. It's just too tired. I'm Brian Brecken. Work for Azure Active Directory engineering team. Lived in the US for the last almost 10 years. Lived in Sweden for some 30 years or so, and then in Iceland where I was born. So most of my friends at work, they claim that I have an identity problem, just not knowing where I live and where I come from. My family is Swedish. I have an Icelandic passport. I live in the US, and I can't vote anywhere just because of laws and regulations. So don't blame me. So I have the great opportunity and really happy to be here this morning. This is a session that was added last minute. Actually, Wednesday afternoon, this session was added into the, as a full breakout. I did a 20-minute theater session. I think we had 1,300, 1,400 people sign up for that theater session. So organizers sort of made sense that we should have a full breakout to get it into recording and all that. So I've got a session and I got a presentation that's really about making sure that we have a good understanding of what options we have for authentication and identity with Office 365. Some of you guys are like, oh, come on, Brian, this is basic stuff. Every time I go through this at conferences, I have people come up afterwards and say, that is so good. I just, perfect, one slide, go do it, understand it. It's super critical for everyone in this room. If you know it, please use what I say, the slides, the content, to spread the message to your colleagues, to people in the industry, to the community all up. And then a big part of this is also how we think about Azure Active Directory Premium, or what we call the paid features and kind of premium SKUs inside of Azure AD. And if you've been to some of the Azure AD sessions during the week, you're going to see slides like, oh, damn, I've seen that before. I'm going to have a different pitch on those slides with regards to how it fits into Office 365 and how it fits into an add-on on top of 365. And also because I had 36 hours to extend 20 minutes to 45 minutes, so I elected to take some beautiful slides instead of making text slides. That's just boring. So I'm going to go through a few things. If we need to during questions in the end, I'll leave questions time at the end. I can do demos and show you stuff in the UI and all that, but let's focus on the story. Let's focus on making sure that we have a good understanding of what it really means to be 365 and Azure AD together. So the first one is really about a misconception, a topic that comes up more and more with organizations that I talk to. And we get the question quite often, and even in the booth this week, came up to us and said, hey, I've got Office 365. How do I get Azure AD? And I'm like, phew. Let's talk about this for a while. I've got Office 365, and now I want to access a bunch of other applications. Do I need to set up another directory? Do I need to set up Azure AD for that? Azure AD is what AD was on premises for 10 years or 15 years, right? Everything in Microsoft's area in an on-prem relies on AD on premises. Exchange, Outlook, or Exchange, Skype, SQL, Windows, and whatever uses AD on-prem to do authentication. Kerberos and all that, and integrated login and everything that's in there, right? Azure AD is our version in the cloud. That is the same topic of Azure AD in the cloud, is to ensure that all services that come from Microsoft initially have a directory service that they can authenticate to. Okay? So if I have Office 365, I am not going to create another Azure AD for my Azure instances. Or my devs, they need their own environment because I don't want to give, no, one Azure AD is enough for every organization in the world. There are some legals that need multiple, but very, very few need more than one Azure AD. If I have resources in Azure that I need to give to people, I create a RBAC role in Azure and give that a specific role to those people. I use what I have on-prem. I use what the user has. I don't want to give users multiple identities. That means multiple places for hackers, attackers to address as well. And you guys to lose control over identity. A few other things that happened on-prem over the years is the evolution from just being a directory service that did AD and authentication, and then we added these identity management pieces, which was, MIS, ILM, or MMS, MIS, ILM, FIM, and MIM. It's like an evolution of the same product over the years. All that, I'll apologize for the naming and pricing of FIM. I might have been responsible for big parts of that. That is added on top of AD as a product, right? And then at the same time, we also released ADFS 2.0, which sort of broke not broke, but enhanced the industry's use of SAML and federation protocols overall. When we released ADFS 2, it really exploded because it's just part of Windows. It was convenient, easy for organizations to start using technology that isn't about locking applications and resources into an on-premises world, right, with Kerberos. Federation enables me to have more flexibility, more options. It enables me to really move my app between locations because I can actually change the authentication provider in that case. So that's some of the things like, so I got a directory, I got an identity management solution that does provisioning sync and all that, and then I have federation. And when we build Azure AD, we said, hey, that's kind of what we need in the cloud too. We need a directory service, we need to be able to provision users in and out of applications and services, and of course we need federation and authentication services to applications overall. So inside of Azure AD, you have all of those components as one. So I can enable scenarios in this slide on-prem, synchronize those users, connect those users up, and then from AD, I have abilities to provision users to security groups, add users to security groups, provision them to applications such as Salesforce or Box or Dropbox or Office or Google Apps or whatever I need to do. But of course, I also have the federation capabilities to provide single sign-on. If I look at the number of users in here, and the really interesting number here is the fourth one from left on your side, which is the 56K. But Azure AD, and this is important, Azure AD is a directory service that every Office 365 customer uses, which is why there are so many organizations on this slide that have a directory service, right? So many users that are using it. That's also why we have 1.5 or 1.2, between 1 and 1.5 billion authentications every day. It's not because we have 1.5 billion auths to Salesforce or so on. It's because it's built on, Azure AD is built on it and built on for Office 365. Everybody's checking email all the time, and somebody in here is checking their email on their phone, and that's synchronizing and authenticating to Azure AD every time you do that, right? 56,000 or over 50,000 customers around the world have adopted these premium features, which I'll talk about later in the session. But there is a bunch of stuff that's part of Azure AD, that is part of Office 365 that you already have. And I'll start there, and I'll kind of tell you when it's premium or not during the session. But 56K sounds like a small number compared to 12.8 million. It's still 15, 20 times larger than any other IDaaS on the market today. And we're one of the last ones to come in, only 3 years old. That's a good number of applications in there. The 272,000 apps, I asked this in my theater session, so I can't do it again because somebody was there, so you're going to cheat. But which app is the most used app outside of Office 365 inside of Azure AD, outside of the Microsoft apps? Most organizations go, oh, Salesforce and ServiceNow, da-da-da, but no, it's Google Apps. Customers using Google Suite or G Suite, authenticating to G Suite using Azure AD. I'm sure there are people over at Google, but they have the same scenario. Customers on G Suite authenticating into Office 365 and authenticating over to our site as well. It's just companies do have a mix, especially universities and public sector and all that. But you see the applications in here, they're all the basic, large, well-known applications that most organizations use, whether it be from Workday, ServiceNow, and Salesforce, and so on. There are over 3,000 applications that are pre-integrated in there. But 272,000 apps are being used every day, every month, I should say, in our system. And those are custom apps. Those are applications such as SaaS apps or apps that enterprises or ISVs have built on top of Azure AD. Same thing that happened on-prem. SAP and IBM and Oracle and everybody integrated with AD on-prem to provide single sign-on and all that. Same thing is happening in the Azure AD because of the numbers that I had. So many customers are using Azure AD. It becomes so beneficial to use it to do a single sign-on and offer services on top of it. And Azure AD doesn't cost anything extra for customers with Office 365 or with customers with Azure. If you just needed to use it like you use AD on-prem for authentication into your custom apps, don't need any IDM capabilities. It's just part of the service, right? So when you want to use it for something more, that's where the premium comes on board. Okay, so if I go to the Office 365 web pages and look at what is identity within Office 365 and the documentation and so on, they talk about 3 different types of users. It's cloud identity, synchronized, and federated. Okay? The cloud identity first one is a user or an organization that just uses cloud directory. They might have something on-prem. So Bob and Jill at bicycle shop on the store on the corner, they might have an on-prem AD, not likely today, but they were founded 10 years ago and they had somebody, small SI, install small business server or something for them. I don't know. They might have something, right? But when they go to the cloud, they don't really matter if they have a cloud-only identity, right? They've created their users in the cloud only. Everything happens in cloud. There's no sync. There's no connection to the on-prem world. This is the majority of our users in Azure AD and Office 365. There are millions and millions and millions of small customers using Office 365 as cloud-only users. Almost 50% of the users in Azure AD and Office 365 are just cloud-only. Not 50%, 50% of the companies. Synchronized identity is the default sort of, this is how I connect my on-prem AD up to Azure AD. And synchronized identities is where I just do synchronization. I still do authentication in the cloud. So I do authentication in Azure AD, but the user is synchronized. This is where I can really, really start to leverage what I have on-prem. I talk about a simple use case. I've got people in the sales department. They have access to a file share on-prem or a printer on-prem. Right? Now we're back 10 years ago, right? That was added into a security group in AD to give them access to those two. Maybe you have an IDM or maybe you have a script that puts them into this group on-prem. Maybe you have installed MIM or Oracle or something to manage the groups on-prem, have governance and all that stuff, depending on the size of the organization. But you have an established process for managing groups on-prem. Now that is just extended into the cloud. I can use the exact same group to give them access to Salesforce, or give them access to CRM, or give them access to something else. I'm using the same group, same users. No admin, no person, No tool needs to connect to Azure AD and say, oh, now I want to use, when Bob is hired, I want to add him to this group and this group. That can be just flowed in from the cloud and all the way up. Use what you have invested on-prem just by making the sync implementation. Okay? I'll focus a lot on these ones in the coming slides. And then federated identity is the same thing. It's sync, but I take my domain, one of my domains, all my domains in Azure AD or in Office, and I tell it that, you know what? I want my authentication of the user to happen on premises or at some other place. For some reason, I don't want to authenticate the users in Azure AD, do the actual creds in Azure AD. I want to do it somewhere else. And ADFS is the standard version that most organizations use today. So the options for identity management, if I kind of double-click into these options, password hash sync and pass-through authentication are both options where the cloud is doing almost all of the authentication of the user. In password hash sync, it's all cloud. Everything is done in the cloud. The credentials, matching of the username and password is done in the cloud. Credentials, validating the user's policies and say, yes, you can access Office, you can access SharePoint, and your app and your device is defined as a device that can access services and so on. All of those controls are done in Azure AD, but it's still synchronized, right? This is the fastest growing, most popular authentication method today, by far, when it comes to new devices, new things. If I look at the statistics, ADFS is still the largest with roughly 40%. We'll get you guys a new public blog post in a few weeks about all the options, but it's roughly about 40% of all these large organizations are using ADFS. But it's growing in the number of password hash syncs. That's the fastest growing. Pass-through authentication is also done in the cloud, but the actual validation of the user's password and credential is delegated down to an agent on-prem that talks to AD. So the actual, it looks and feels and smells just like password hash sync. It looks and feels and smells like federation, but it's just a simpler deployment, easier to do. And I'll do a couple of drill down slides into that in a second. I'll do that for both of those. Federated identity, it's just federation. That's what everybody's using today. When it comes to, if you ever did that with a partner with MCS, that usually happens, then it's ADFS. If you did it on your own, it's usually password hash sync. There could be reasons for that. One is really simple, it's done in a few little clicks. The other one takes a little bit more planning and maybe a few weeks of implementation and a bunch of servers and infrastructure and consulting and other things that need to happen to do that. But I want you guys to think about password hash sync as the default. Second is pass-through auth. When needed, it is federated identity. And never, or as seldom as you like, third-party federated somewhere else. That really doesn't give you a lot of options, a lot of extra value to do something where it's completely third-party validated, third-party federated. And that includes third-party IDaaS solutions, for example. Like what I'm doing there is I'm adding all my users into this other directory, and now I'm figuring out how to do prompts and authentication across Azure AD and other directory and their federation and their authentication schemes. That just adds complexity. Okay, let's do a drill down into a couple of these to explain them a little bit more. Yeah, this one is super complex. So password hash sync. So first of all, it's important to understand that this is hash sync. It's not taking my password from AD and populating it in clear text over the wire and pushing that password into some password field in Azure AD. It's just like it's on-prem. There's no password field in AD that has a clear text password. It's all a hash. Salted, hashed, and so on. There's a bunch of technical documentation online as how that is done. In reality, it's not even the same hash that's on-prem. It's a different hash in Azure AD than it is on-prem. So here what happened. A user resets their password in AD on-prem. Reset their password. AD does its work of taking the user's password, taking its hashes and its salt and so on, puts it into AD. Azure AD Connect, soon as that password hits AD, sees that there's a password change. Now it will take that and do a other hash on that password and push it all the way up to Azure AD. And the Azure AD one is not applicable to the on-prem. The on-prem can't be used in the cloud. The cloud one can't be used on-prem. But the user's credentials is the same. So when I enter username and password, on-prem or cloud, they both work. Because in the cloud, they know which hash and what method they need to do. On-prem, we know which method and so on that needs to be done. That make sense? So they're different. The hashes are different. The credentials are the same. So from an end user perspective, I just get single sign-on, basically. Let's call it same sign-on. Because it's really not single. I can do both, right? So when it comes to pass-through authentication, I'm going to solve that in a few seconds, by the way, the single sign-on. I'll show you that in a second, or talk about that in a second. So pass-through authentication. I still do cloud-based authentication, but the same password as I have on-prem is used. It's very similar to pass-through auth. But now what happens is I use these agent on-prem to get my password into AD, or my password validation into AD on-premises instead. So the actual user cred validation happens using this agent, but it happens on-prem. Some of the benefits of this is that it doesn't have any DMZ or no inbound firewall requirements. And I'll say that again. There's no DMZ deployment, and there's no inbound firewall requirements. So how does this agent talk? Like, how does Azure AD find the agent? The agent talks to the service bus in the cloud and basically sits and waits for messages to be loaded and retrieves those when authentications happen. Makes it much more secure than having a externally facing open inbound port somewhere. All is done in Azure AD. Agent-based deployment means super easy to administer and deploy. You run Azure AD Connect. You enable password authentication, and you tell it how many agents do you want. You install the agents on 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, how many servers you want to have it in there. Recommend 2. Simple agent that installs on some domain controller, or not on domain controllers, on something else than domain controllers. It doesn't have to be, again, not in DMZ. So the auth flow, if you go through this one, the user hits an application. The session is sent to Azure AD to sign in because the app is integrated or the app is federated to Azure AD. Could be Office, could be Salesforce, could be something else that just knows that, hey, I need Azure AD to give me the ticket to get in. Okay? So user provides credentials in this case. The user could, in different circumstances, the user, if it's completely outside of your network, the user will provide a username and password. And if they're inside the network on a domain joined PC, what's called seamless SSO kicks in. Seamless SSO means when the user enters their username in a web page in the authentication, and they hit next, seamless SSO kicks in and says, hey, I know this guy. He's on a domain PC. It's Kerberos. And it'll do Kerberos authentication for you undercover. So it will never ask the user for their password either. Very simple. It's like doing a login, but never getting the password prompt. That gives me seamless SSO with both password hash sync and pass-through authentication. So I can get over that scenario where they do password hash sync is like, I'm always getting prompted. No, you don't. You don't get prompted for your creds. Now, Seamless SSO was launched together with PTA yesterday, or on Wednesday. Okay? So provides credentials. Credentials are encrypted and queued in the bus. PTA picks up the queued requests. The PTA agent, pass-through agent on-prem, picks up the queued request, decrypts that so I can take the credentials and send them over to my domain controller on-prem to validate the AD credentials. AD says, yoo-hoo, yep, you got it. Completes the sign-in back to AD, so it should be not Azure AD, it should be AD. Completes the sign-in in that slide. And then it sends it up to Azure AD and says, okay, PTA agent has validated the user. His credentials are fine. Now Azure AD will look at the user and say, are you still able to access the app? Do you have access to the application? And are you on the right device and on the right network? And before the actual user gets access to the service, right? So the Azure AD completes the sign-in. So this gives me an opportunity to still do authentication on-prem, but with a very simple deployment infrastructure that is on-prem. There are some caveats to PTA. PTA today is supported with modern authentication only, which means if I'm running old legacy Office 365 clients, for example, PTA cannot work. We're working on it. But the cool thing is, if I'm actually running password hash sync and PTA together, PTA is going to take care of everything as soon as it is modern off. But in the case where you have users that haven't migrated over to the modern clients will use PHS, or password hash sync, and still do the authentication. That's all detailed in our documentation. The seamless sign-in scenario, I already talked about it, but the seamless sign-in is a capability that's available both with password hash sync and with PTA. It just enables me to get rid of the extra prompts, especially when the user is external. As soon as the user is outside of the corporate network, I don't want them to be prompted all the time. Did I just lose? No, I don't. When the user is on premises, if I'm doing password hash sync, if you did that, let's say 6 months ago, the experience would be even when I'm on-prem and I go to the cloud, it will still need to prompt me because if I do password hash sync, everything is done in the cloud, right? With SSO, with seamless SSO, that doesn't happen anymore. So even when I'm on-prem and I do password hash sync, I get that same experience that you want and the reason why you installed ADFS to begin with, which was laptop up, start the app, sign in, just work. Okay? That's the scenario why customers have chosen ADFS. Most of the cases, that is no longer needed. Accelerates that deployment greatly. So together with all of these, password hash sync and pass-through auth, I still have to synchronize the users up to Azure AD. Both PTA and password hash sync and seamless SSO, all three of them, can be enabled using AD Connect. And then I get my same thing as I did in the past. So I still have to synchronize the users. I enable them through AD Connect. And now I can do both seamless SSO, PTA, and password hash sync. All of three work at the same time, or you can do just password hash sync in SSO, or SSO and PTA if you want to. A couple of other identity things in Azure in Office 365. Do I need more than one Azure AD if I have more than one AD on premises? No. Can I use multiple forests on-prem to one Azure AD? Yes. Despite what some of our competitors are telling you for the last 5 years. We've done that for the last 4 or 5 almost. Multiple forests is supported. It's highly recommended, as I said, not to have multiple tenants. But what about domain names on-prem? How does that be reflected in the cloud? A lot of times I get questions like, oh, so how do I get my OU structure? And how do you find the domains in Azure AD? And what's a domain on-prem versus domain in the cloud? Like, I got to get rid of all that legacy ideas of how we manage identities. Domains on-prem is a way within AD to define what a security boundary is, or what a boundary of administration is. Not a security boundary, administration boundary. Domain in Azure AD is a domain name. brecken.com, brecken.net, breckendemo.com, or whatever it might be is your company name. That is a domain in Azure AD. Not some administrative or combination of users and so on. So you can have multiple domain names in the same Azure AD instance. Can I have a mix of cloud-only and on-premises synchronized accounts? This is typical in organizations such as EDU, education, maybe staff has access to on-prem resources. A lot of the students only have cloud resources. Manufacturing, retail, have a lot of scenarios where the retail sort of on-the-floor workers or factory or drivers or people that really don't need PC access, they just need access to services such as email, maybe ServiceNow to file a ticket and say that I'm done, or their little app that they have on their phone needs to communicate. Those are cloud-only accounts a lot of times. So one Azure AD can combine on-prem and cloud-only and any type of mix that you want in there as well. Can I use other tools than Azure AD Connect to synchronize users from AD on-prem up to Office 365, up to Azure AD? So why is Microsoft pushing Azure AD Connect so hard? I've got this cool thing on-prem that's called MIM, or I've got this cool thing called SailPoint, or Oracle, or a cool guy at the IT department that wrote a bunch of scripts, or whatever it might be, right? PowerShell and Graph API are the great APIs for you to manipulate objects in Azure AD, including creating objects in Azure AD. Problem with it is kind of hard to make Graph API and PowerShell and all that do incremental updates and so on. You have to manage paging and a bunch of other things in there. It works. But Azure AD Connect and Office 365 collaborate together on hybrid scenarios. Azure AD Connect is not just a sync engine for user objects to get created in Azure AD. Azure AD Connect manages, I just talked about it, PTA, password hash sync, and all of that for you, which you could turn on with PowerShell as well if you want to. But Azure AD Connect manages password write back into AD on-prem. If you don't have AD Connect, you can't do password resets with using the cloud service on AD on-prem passwords. You can't use hybrid exchange, hybrid Skype, because hybrid exchange, hybrid Skype, and other Office services use Azure AD to communicate basically service to service, attributes that need to flow that aren't in public APIs, that are not available in Graph or in other APIs that are needed inside of the services. So Azure AD Connect is the only tool, including MIM, that supports Azure AD or hybrid exchange or hybrid Skype or hybrid Office 365. You can't use MIM for that. You can't use any third party if you're using hybrid. Have to use Azure AD Connect. And it's not, there's no cost for it. It's free. It's just use it. Okay? Okay, you have Azure AD, use it. So I'll go through. These are the slides that you've seen before. So there's 6 different kind of use cases out of Azure AD. In the last few years, we've been every time we talk about Azure AD, we always talk about the features and functions and little capability here and capability there. There's self-service password reset, and there's group management, and there's this proxy, and it's hundreds of features and functions in the system right now. So we've elected to sort of talk about it in 6 types of scenarios, right? So the first scenario is really about employees' secure access to applications from any device, any location, right? If I have Office 365, it is very likely that I also have one more SaaS application out there. Okay? If I'm running Office 365, I likely have something else that might be running. Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, Concur, something. Learning management system is super popular as well. Right? And what I see way too many times is organization, oh, now I have to install ADFS on-prem, or I have to go and buy this other third-party IDaaS to do the authentication to the third-party SaaS. And I'm like, no. Click. Turn it on. Add the application into Azure AD, and it's all there. Right? The user's authenticated into Azure AD. Why not give them the option of signing in with that same user ID, that same session, right into other SaaS applications? Super popular to do because it's so easy. There's no other new infrastructure to be made. It uses PTA, password hash sync. However you authenticate the user, just reuse it. Don't set up a new way to authenticate. All the self-service capabilities within Azure AD that enable me to access resources, such as making group management. I can manage my own groups. I can manage security groups to give access to resources. You can have workflows on group management, which means I can have workflow on a group that has access to an app. So the app owner can validate every user that wants to access the application. So a bunch of features within Azure AD, and this is premium features, that allow me to do more than just say, ooh, authenticate, which we would do if you would do just ADFS, for example. The other thing that you'll get with the premium capabilities overall is a way to do multi-factor authentication to everything, not just Office 365, but MFA to all other SaaS apps, everything that's out there. The apps that I add, there's an icon down there that says the Office 365 App Launcher. The apps that I add will be visible both in the Microsoft Azure AD panel, the little panel with a bunch of icons with apps, but they can also be added and visible within the Office launcher. So if the users are in OWA and they click the little waffle, that was what they called before, but I can't remember what it's called now, the icon at the left-hand corner, you'll see everything drop down, including Salesforce and ServiceNow and so on. The second scenario is joiner movers and leavers. I already talked a little bit about that because when I talked about why identity management on-prem is important, right? You add users to groups and stuff on-prem. But one cool feature that's available in Azure AD is called dynamic groups. So when I add people to groups and stuff on-prem, or I just put them into different attributes. If a user comes in, they're in department sales, they're a manager, those are attributes in AD. Those get pushed into Azure AD. In Azure AD, I can have a dynamic group that says, you're a member of this group if you're a manager and you're in sales. Now I can use that group to define who gets to do access reviews, who gets to do access to Salesforce and a specific role in Salesforce, and so on. A bunch of things that I can flow up and use as part of my joiner, mover, and leaver processes. If I'm using HR apps in the cloud, then Azure AD is the hook into those instead of doing cloud and on-prem identity management stuff to take the information out. Azure AD is a sync engine, like I said before. It can provide access to and from HR applications. Access to apps anywhere including partners and consumers. So some of these scenarios in this world is around B2B. Like Azure AD is there to create a federated platform for business-to-business collaboration. We don't want you to manage your partners' identities. We want you to manage your partners' access to your resources. So B2B is set up in a way where the user gets invited to access your SharePoint or your application, but their identity still lives in their tenant. You get a little bit of what's called a guest account in your world. It doesn't have any credentials. It's for you to be able to manage, put them into a group, add on MFA, do things on there, do credentials, do governance, making sure that you can go in and say, give me all the users that have access, all my business users that have access to services in the last 30 days. Which one haven't? But you're never touching the end user. If they get fired, they're gone in your system. They can't access your system anymore. That's the B2B scenario for us. Super, super important scenario that enables business-to-business collaboration. It's included in Azure AD and the premium features. It's included in every Azure AD instance. 5-to-1. So one license, one user in Azure AD allows the organization to have 5 partners. So if you own 10,000 licenses, you can collaborate with 50,000 individual partners. So number 4 up here, advanced threats. There's like 5 sessions at the event using identity protection and all that. I'm not going to go through all that basics but I've been doing identity in Azure AD for 4 years, identity for 15. Customers that went out and they acquired IDaaS, third-party IDaaS, or are looking at coming into this IDaaS world, the first question I get is, how can I do conditional access? Conditional access is a killer feature for organizations. When I meet with CIOs, CEOs, and so on, the thing that we talk about is, this is a tool for you to enable yes instead of no. What I mean by that is, I can now allow my users to access resources when they are remote from different type of devices in compliant with your policies. You can't access resource X unless you are on a managed device. If you're unmanaged, do MFA. In the past, that was, you know what? I can't allow you to do that unless you're on the on-premises network using a domain joined PC. Now I can do that with iPads and iOS and Androids and still get the CISO and security team and compliance team to agree with it. It's actually okay. One cool thing that we do in Azure AD for Office 365 is that nobody else can do, including if you authenticate back to Azure ADFS and do conditional access there, is to do conditional access per Office 365 service. OA, no access controls, just the standard authentication. SharePoint, MFA. OneDrive, MFA. Limited access to SharePoint if you're not coming in from a specific type of device. You only get read access to SharePoint. Those things are value adds that we add straight on top of Office 365. Governance and audits is something that we heavily invest in as a cloud service. Governance has enormous amount of very good on-premises products. SailPoint, Domata, Savient are 3 that we partner with to provide organizations that need the advanced governance capabilities. They are on-premises, but organizations are coming up more and more asking about governance, but they don't want to go into these complex identity management projects on-prem. So we're investing a lot in cloud-based governance capabilities, such as access reviews. Give me all users that haven't been in this accessing this app for a long time, or all the partners that haven't activated their accounts, and so on. And create access reviews where people need to validate it and say, yep, I approve that these users still should have access to this application. Very basic, but very, very valuable governance capabilities. Bunch of stuff that's in public preview as of this week as well around that. And then this is not really a case that adds value on top of like Office. It's not really a premium feature either. This is just that identity management, Azure AD is a platform. 272,000 unique apps are being active in Azure AD. Means that it's being used as an application dev platform because of standards that we support, the openness of the platform, ability to use any application, any device, not just Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, whatever you want to use, it can be done with Azure AD as a platform. So I got 1 minute over. I'll finish my sessions here. So a couple of things that you want to think about with administrative tasks. I've already gone through this in the previous slides, basically. But from an admin task that get better, that have enhancements from Office 365 admins, some of the things in protection are conditional access. That's the key one over there. All the MFA capabilities, super important. Privileged identity management, enable me to take people out of Exchange admin role and give them the ability to request to be an admin when it's time for them to do some work as an Exchange admin. Remember that, just in time is for you to get much more secure and highly sought after capability to protect admin accounts. Manage users, password write back, MFA for more apps than just Office, of course. Groups, one of my favorites is dynamic groups. It's so powerful when it comes to creating groups, creating groups that I can use to give access to applications. Create groups that can manage Office 365 groups, for example. What we can do in Azure AD is to enable you to delegate out which users should be able to manage Office 365 groups. But you can do that based on dynamic groups. So like the manager's management team could be dynamic, doesn't have to be a static group. So when people change roles, they fall out of the access rights and groups in here as well. Auto expiration, preview, and user experiences that get better with Premium. The key thing that happens, every Office 365 deployment, the second thing you should do is turn on MFA. Every user in your organization has to have MFA at least registered so that if something happens, you can turn it on. It's really sad to realize that when it's like too late. Like, oh, I wish my users had MFA because we're being attacked. If they're at least registered, even if you're not using it, you can turn it on over basically with a click. Password reset is the second one. And then the daily work, I love the less authentication prompts. That's my favorite in there. Yeah, the rest I've already talked about. With that, I'm going to just guide you through the different sessions that you should have gone through. Well, kidding. This is for the recording, and when you download the DAC that I will go and upload in about 10 minutes to the website so that you can download and use the DAC. Everything in this slide deck is open for you to use. If not, reach out to me. I'll be happy to help you guys out with something different. Okay? Any questions come up here while I pack up? I can't take questions on the board because I'm 4 minutes over. Now, hands up if this was valuable. Thank you. And hands up. Thanks. Give me high scores on the demos, by the way.